very, very simple. Why is that funny?
Well, I think it's a bit funny to be trying to define nothing.
Things which you can ask. What's funny about that? What is funny about that?
OK, we'd like the audience not to yell out. If we can do that, that'd be great. We're going to move on.
I didn't finish, I'm sorry.
OK, well, finish your point.
OK.
You're hallucinating.
Exactly. I agree. I agree.
Can I just put a question to you? Could you ever provide Richard Dawkins with the sort of proof he requires for belief, scientific proof of the existence of God?
No, because I think he only accepts proof that is...
Wow, Richard Dawkins really has a meltdown when the audience responds and laughs at him. Can science and faith truly coexist, or are they at forever odds? In part 2 of this groundbreaking debate between Richard Dawkins and Cardinal George Pell, we tackle some of the most contentious issues. Is belief in God irrational? Can suffering ever have meaning? And does evolution eliminate the need for a creator? Well, stick around for a shocking conclusion that will make you rethink everything. Do you agree or disagree? Let us know in the comments down below and share your take. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay updated as our series moves along. And if you want to support the spread of the gospel and a robust dialogue, buy us a coffee. Your support helps this mission.
That is rooted in sense experience. In other words, he excludes the world of metaphysics, say the principle of contradiction, and he excludes the possibility of arguments that don't go against reason, but go beyond it. But could I make one little suggestion as to why Richard calls himself an atheist? Because in one of his blogs in 2002, he was discussing whether he's an agnostic or a non-theist. He said he prefers to use the term atheist because it's more explosive, it's more dynamic. You can shake people up. Whereas if you're just going around saying that you're an agnostic or a non-theist, it's not... these are his own words.
Well, let's let Richard Dawkins...
I don't remember saying that. It wouldn't totally surprise me. It's in
2002.
It's an ongoing issue. What's the best way? There is a problem with the word atheist, especially in America. I don't know whether it's true in Australia. There's a lovely woman. I'm blocking on her name because I'm jet-lagged. She's an Irish-American woman. Anybody help me?
There are quite a few Irish-American women. Sorry about that.
Sorry? No. Anyway, I do apologise personally to her for forgetting her name. She's an actress, and she's got she did a film on how she escaped from the Roman Catholic Church, and it's a very moving film. And at the end, her mother discovered that she was an atheist, and her mother phoned her up and said, "Well, I don't mind you not believing in God, but an atheist?" Her name's Julia Sweeney, so it's suddenly come back to me. I strongly recommend that. Now, the point is that the word atheist, unlike just simply not believing in God, has bad connotations. And so, to some extent, people have wished to depart from that and change the name to non-theist or secularist or non-believer. And I waver back and forth as to what's the best name to use. I sometimes call myself an atheist, sometimes a non-theist. And sometimes just a non-believer.
George Pell, can I just come back to you on this question of the existence of God? Why would God randomly decide to provide proof of his existence to a small group of Jews 2,000 years ago and not subsequently provide any proof after that?
Well, I don't think there's ever been any scientific proof. I don't believe God does anything randomly, although he might set up a system which works apparently through through chance, through randoms. But if you want something done, you've got to ask somebody. It's no good, say, my asking everyone in the congregation, will you do something? Normally you go to a busy person because you know they'll do it. And so for some extraordinary reason, God chose the Jews. They weren't intellectually the equal of either the Egyptians or the...
Intellectually?
Intellectually, morally...
How can you know intellectually?
Because you see the fruits of their civilization. Egypt was the great power for thousands of years before Christianity. Persia was a great power. The poor, the little Jewish people, they were originally shepherds. They were stuck, they're still stuck
but
between these great powers.
That's not a reflection of your intellectual capacity, is it, whether or not you're a shepherd?
Well... no, it's not, but it's a recognition, it is a reflection of your intellectual development. But like many people are very, very clever and not not highly intellectual. But my point is...
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Are you including Jesus in that, who obviously was Jewish and was of that community?
Exactly.
So intellectually not up to it?
Oh, well, that's a nice try, Tony. The people, in terms of sophistication, the Psalms are remarkable. In terms of their buildings and that sort of thing, they don't compare with the great powers. But Jesus came not as a philosopher to the elite. He came to the poor and the battlers. And for some reason, he chose a very difficult, but actually they are now an intellectually elite, because over the centuries they've been pushed out of every other form of work. Jesus, I think, is the greatest, son of God, but leaving that aside, the greatest man that ever lived. So I've got a great admiration for the Jews, but we don't need to exaggerate their contribution in their early days.
All right, you're watching Q&A. Remember, you can send your web or video questions to our website. The address is on the screen to find out how to do that. Our next question is a video. It comes from Andrew Watson in Blackburn, Victoria.
Question for Richard Dawkins. The Big Bangers believe that once there was nothing, then suddenly, poof, the universe was created from a Big Bang. If I have nothing in the palm of my hand, close my fingers, speak the word bang, then open my fingers again, still I find there is nothing there. I ask you to explain to us in layman's terms how it is that something as enormous as the universes came from nothing.
Richard Dawkins.
Well, obviously, you're not a physicist, and nor am I. And I am delighted to say that during my time in Australia, I shall be having a number of conversations, public conversations, with my colleague Lawrence Krauss, including one in the Sydney Opera House later, I think it's next week. And he's written a book on exactly that topic of how you can get something from nothing, and I shall be questioning him about that. Of course it's counterintuitive that you can get something from nothing. Of course common sense doesn't allow you to get something from nothing. That's why it's interesting. It's got to be interesting in order to give rise to the universe at all. Something pretty mysterious had to give rise to the origin of the universe. Now, if you want to replace a physical explanation by an intelligent God, that's an even worse explanation. It's an even more difficult explanation. What scientists are trying to do is to explain how you can get not just something, but the immense complexity of the world, of the universe, and of life. And science is making a pretty good fist of doing that. Life is now completely solved, barring the details. That was Darwin's contribution and Darwin's successors. Physicists are still working on the origin of the cosmos. Among them is Lawrence Krauss, whom I shall be talking to next week. Now, it is very mysterious how the universe came into being. It's a deeply mysterious and interesting question.
And can I just interrupt? It's an old question, a very old question. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century was asking the same question. He said there must have been a time when no physical things existed, but something can't come from nothing. That was his view. It's just been repeated by us.
Something can come from nothing, and that's what physicists are now telling us. I could give you asked me to give you a layman's interpretation. It would be a very, very layman's interpretation. When you have matter and antimatter and you put them together, they cancel each other out and give rise to nothing. What Lawrence Krauss is now suggesting is that if you start with nothing, the process can go into reverse and produce matter and antimatter. The theory is still being worked out. It's a very difficult theory, mathematical theory. I'm not qualified to answer the question, but what I am sure about is that it most certainly is not solved by postulating an intelligence, a creative intelligence, who raises even bigger questions of his own existence. That certainly is not going to be the answer, whatever else is.
George Pell.
Thank you. The trouble, well, there are many troubles with Richard's teachings, but a fundamental one is that he dumbs down God and he soups up nothing. He continually talks as though God is some sort of upmarket figure within space and time. Now, from 450, 500 BC, where with the Greek philosophers, God is outside space and time. God is necessary, self-sufficient, uncaused, unconditioned. That's the hypothesis you've got to wrestle with. The second thing is that Krauss says nothing about the Big Bang coming out of nothing. Admittedly, he comes clean on about 6 pages from the end of his book, and I don't know whether Richard has read it that far because he gave it a foreword. What he says is what Richard is describing as nothing is a sort of a mixture of particles and perhaps a vacuum with electromagnetic forces working on it. That's what Krauss is talking about under the heading of nothing. And there's a very good review of this in the New York Times. Not a pro-religious paper at all, where Krauss is absolutely denied and demolished, although especially by his supporters claiming that he says things come out of nothing. He doesn't say that.
It's a matter,
you can quickly respond to that before
you
next
can
week.
dispute exactly what's meant by nothing, but whatever it is, it's very, very simple. And why is that funny?
Well, I think it's a bit funny to be trying to define nothing.
Well, can I put that to you as a question? Is it equally feasible, since you can't prove the existence of God, that the nothing you're talking about is in fact some creative force?
If you talk about a God who is a creative intelligence, then that is something very complicated and very improbable, and something that requires explaining in its own right. The nothing that Lawrence Krauss is talking about, whether or not it's what a naive person would conceive as nothing or what a sophisticated physicist would consider to be nothing, it is going to be something much, much simpler than a creative intelligence. We're all struggling, scientists are struggling, to explain how we get the fantastic order and complexity of the universe out of very simple and therefore easy to understand, easy to explain beginnings. Lawrence Krauss calls the substrate of his explanation nothing. It's possible to dispute whether nothing is quite the right word, but whatever it is very, very simple, and therefore is a worthy premise for an explanation. Whereas a God, a creative intelligence, is not a worthy substrate for an explanation because it is already something very complicated. And it's no good invoking Thomas Aquinas and saying that God is defined as outside time and space. That's just a cop-out. That's just an evasion of the responsibility to explain. That's just setting out what you want to prove before you've even started.
OK, let's move on to a question. Let's move on to a question on evolution for Cardinal Pell from Joe Blades.
As a young Catholic scientist, I'd like to ask the Cardinal to clarify the Roman Catholic Church's position on evolution and comment on whether the dichotomy between science and religion is in fact real.
Well, science and religion are two different activities, and in the Catholic Church, you can believe to some extent what you like about evolution. I think Darwin made a great contribution. I remember talking with Julius Kornberg, a very distinguished biologist, and he's worked with ants for years, and he said, you know, he's managed to change them by changing the conditions. But there are a number of things that evolution doesn't explain. Darwin realised that. Darwin was a theist because he said he couldn't believe that the immense cosmos and all the beautiful things in the world came about either by chance or out of necessity. He said, I have to be ranked as a theist.
Point number 1, rationality of belief in God. Richard Dawkins criticizes belief in God as irrational, favoring empirical evidence as the only valid form of knowledge. But faith is not blind, but based on evidence. We can look at philosophical reasoning, the cosmological argument, and personal experience that supports our belief in God. Rationality itself implies the existence of a higher mind, as naturalistic processes alone cannot produce immaterial reasoning. Imagine trying to explain the beauty of a painting solely through the chemical composition of the colors. Similarly, a purely naturalistic worldview cannot account for abstract reasoning or beauty itself. The Bible tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. We can reflect on the balance of faith and reason in our lives. Can you defend your faith with logic and humility and reason? Which leads us to point number 2, the meaning of suffering. Richard Dawkins portrays suffering as incompatible with a compassionate God, while Cardinal Pell introduces the Christian concept of redemptive suffering. Christianity uniquely offers a framework for understanding suffering, not as meaningless, but as a means to grow closer to God and display his power in weakness. And Jesus' suffering on the cross exemplifies how God brings ultimate good from bad or from pain. You see, the pearl forms when an oyster suffers irritation from a grain of sand. And likewise, God can transform suffering into something beautiful. That's why the Bible tells us, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Personal suffering, personal struggles is often what God can use to show and prove his strength in the midst of our weakness. My friends, in your suffering, in your struggles, seek to find God and how he's using that to refine your character and bring about a greater purpose. Which brings us to point number 3, evolution and creation. Let's talk about this. Richard Dawkins asserts that evolution explains life without the need for a creator, reducing faith to irrelevance. While evolution describes mechanisms, but it can't describe origins. It does not address why there is something rather than nothing, or why life exists with purpose or meaning or love. Theistic evolution reconciles God's sovereignty with scientific discovery. You see, a watch tells time, but it didn't create itself. It required a watchmaker. And similarly, evolution as a process points to a divine orchestrator. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. In Colossians, this is what Paul is talking about Jesus. And we can dive deeper into the relationship between science and faith when our relationship is strong with God. How does understanding God as creator deepen our worship and appreciation for the natural world? Because we can see him in all of the wonders. Finally, point number 4, the role of free will. The existence of suffering challenges the idea of a loving God, yes, but it also emphasizes the necessity for free will for authentic love and moral growth. A world without free will would lack meaningful relationships and moral accountability. God's allowance of freedom, even when it results in suffering, is an act of love via that free will. You see, a parent allows a child to make mistakes to learn to grow. And similarly, God permits free will to develop character and genuine love. Now, the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Consider how God's gift of free will shapes your life, shapes your decisions. Are you using your freedom to glorify him and serve others? This is why we have free will. And that leads us to point number 5, science as worship. Richard Dawkins separates science and faith, suggesting that scientific progress undermines belief in God. While far from being at odds, science can inspire worship by revealing the complexity and majesty of creation. And many great scientists were devout Christians who saw their work as exploring God's creation. Think of a symphony. Understanding the instruments doesn't diminish the composer's brilliance, but it enhances the appreciation for the music. Great are the works of the Lord. They are pondered by all who delight in them. How can we use our curiosity and intellect to deepen our faith? How can we explore the learning about creation and how it enhances our awe of the Creator? Jesus Christ bridges the gap between science and faith, reason and revelation. He is the ultimate answer to life's deepest questions. Friends, I pray that you would seek the shepherd in the struggle, discover the light in the labyrinth, witness the Redeemer in the research, and embrace the way in the wonder of the creation that shows a Creator.